Okay, welcome back. We are recording once again, and we're on to item 8, Pillar 4, Prevent Offending.
May I step into that space? If I may just start, so preventing offending. If I may just start by a couple of opening comments. We continue to play our part, as the paper kind of demonstrates, through an influential and key role in a number of county partnerships where they're statutory or non-statutory partnerships. The police service are very much involved in a number of those partnerships. And another general point, and I will come to it specifically, but both in terms of what this paper describes, we're pushing hard on diversionary activity, be that conditional cautions or community resolutions or other areas where we can engage with those that are on the cusp of crime and divert them away from crime. That's not to say that we're soft, nor where it's appropriate to use the full sanction of law. Of course we will, and we do, and I'm very keen on, in fact, I'm very keen on arresting people. I think it's the right thing to be doing. But equally, we need to be, your point around appealing Principle 2 about being forearmed by the people and making sure that our legitimacy is given by our public, that we're not so officious that we're out of step with what we need to do. So I start with just those kind of broad comments. But as the paper clearly describes, we're still heavily involved with both children and vulnerable adults, and very much key partners in that. There are some statistics there that I probably won't necessarily highlight, but again, it just goes to show the involvement that we have in keeping people safe and using both the criminal justice system where we need to, but our skills in supporting, whether that's Section 47 reviews around children's, and ensuring that we bring information to that particular environment so that decisions around the safeguarding of and the best support to children can be made, the decisions around that. The paper will mention where we are and what we're doing, not least around serious violence in the CSP space, delivering that serious violence duty, and significant work's going on, as I think you know, Commissioner, around the Norfolk Drug and Alcohol Partnership. So that's still very much current and lots of work is going on there. If I may just move us on to, and I'll make some specific comments around the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Partnership. As the table on it's actually on page, I think 46 for me, shows that we have 14 live perpetrators, those involved in domestic abuse, and that's the active cohort, and that's intensive work, clearly a limited number, but these are, and I again, tread carefully, they are a challenging group of individuals to address, but given the profile, when you look at both the impact that domestic abuse has, the insidious and chronic impact it has on people's lives, and also the numbers of domestic abuse incidents that we, the police and others, are engaged with, by engaging with those perpetrators that are willing, albeit partially, to change their behaviours, it's worth their investment. As it also says there, we have many more on what we call the monitoring cohort, and a significant number of referrals into the change, that commission service for those that are wanting to. So the initial engagement, which is disrupting the behaviour, disrupting the activity, stopping the harm, and then the work that goes on through that change, referral into diverting them. This is very much in line, I think we've alluded to, and the Chief mentioned earlier, that a number of the pressures that are brought to bear on the constabulary, whether that's VAWG action plan activity, the policing minister referencing the need to engage with and divert perpetrators to domestic abuse. And clearly this is the constabulary's response, supported, I know, through funding from you and others, to ensure that we have a service that has reach into our communities to prevent, or at least divert people from committing domestic abuse. It's a tricky one to be involved in. I'll also just highlight where we are around that item 4, reducing the revolving door of crime. Very much, I referenced earlier around the way that we are looking at performance measures within the constabulary. Another key performance measure for me, of course, I look at, and I probably use slightly old language, but detection rates. So what's our conversion from crimes coming in to individuals being charged? But equally, there is a need and an opportunity to divert people away from crime. So very much looking at what is our conditional caution rates and what are our community resolutions looking like, and they are certainly on the increase and in the right space, because we're looking at them. And of course, as the paper describes, we have a number of referral pathways through Red Stamper that gives us opportunities to, as part of that conditional caution approach, and to make sure people are aware that conditional caution is you will get a caution if you undertake a number of activities, or a single activity actually, and if you don't, you then revert back into that caution, in fact revert into a potential charge situation, or you go to court. And then of course we, as I say, in terms of community resolutions, actually very swift justice. We again mentioned earlier about some of the issues in the criminal justice system and the delays, but community resolution sometimes is about reparations, sometimes saying sorry and moving that through quite quickly. We're focusing on that and ensuring that we use them appropriately, but making sure when we have an opportunity to use it and it's right for the victim, it's right for the perpetrator, the offender, that we also use that too. So I just draw your attention to those kind of key aspects.
On that last point, just as a follow-up point, you say right for the victim. What's the mechanism for confirming the victims are content with the action being taken?
We ask them, describe what's going to be done, and if we use a degree of professional, we explain in a professional way as to why it would work, and give rationale as to why. We wouldn't necessarily
It's not imposed on them,
not at all. And part certainly around that caution, we have to. It's obligatory as part of the conditions of caution to speak to and seek the views of the victim. We will explain why we do this. We'll also explain, particularly with the caution, what that means in terms of criminal records, and particularly with the conditional caution, what the implications are and what they have to do relative to what potentially you would get if you went through the court system and the potential time limits.
Yeah, great, thank you. Got a couple of questions under this. Page 48, Objective 5, the final bullet point, which is to do with racial disparity. And I'm sort of reflecting back to the recent thematic HMIC report, which suggested that policing in general perhaps didn't understand the levels of racial disproportionality in serious youth violence. So I wondered what Norfolk was doing to address that point. And I asked that question mindful that we've got Stephen Lawrence Day coming up on Friday.
Of course, a couple of points I suppose I want to raise. Firstly, through the National Police Chiefs Council, an operational standards and guidance set of data requirements is around protected characteristics. It's been fully developed around this particular specific issue around youth violence to ensure that actually we measure apples against apples, because inevitably, in fact, it happens, we get compared. And from a national perspective, we're making sure that we're aligning the way that we collect data relative to the national position. But at a local level, we've developed a data dashboard, as you would expect, which provides the right focus around victims, suspects, offenders, their ages, ensures that actually we look at the data set in terms of where, who, when, crime types, outcomes, making sure we understand who the individuals are. So we are some way in that spot. We are, and always have as a constabulary, been good with our data, make sure that we understand what's going on. I take the challenge around the potential disproportionality. Some of that relates to the kind of where we're looking at in terms of crime, whether that's child criminal exploitation, child sexual exploitation, county lines, gangs. That whole environment is a complex environment. The data certainly gives you one aspect of what's going on. We are aware of that data set, and we do look at it and we do use it. So, of course, we're not suggesting that we relax about it. We make sure we understand what the crime types are like relative to the profile of both victims, witnesses, and suspects.
And then my second question goes to page 5, Objective 5. So it's not page 5, it's page 48. Objective 5 is out of court disposals, which I know you've touched on. we're keen to keep first-time offenders out of the court system, particularly if they're juveniles. But what can we do more about this, particularly given the emphasis placed on it by the government's antisocial behaviour action plan?
I think it's a fair question, and I think I've touched on it partly. I suppose I opened by saying, and again it comes back to that point around arresting people. I think we need to be in line with and clearly listening to our communities, because some of the offences that are being that do occur by juveniles, let's be clear, juveniles all the way up to under 18s, are fairly significant and serious, or can be. However, not all young people are in that space. This is exploring the world, and discovering, or at least trying to discover, where the boundaries of life can't happen to be. So what I would say is that we have been alive to this. This isn't new to us, and we've been working on this for quite a significant time. So the numbers of young people aged, as I say, between 10, criminal age consent to 17, have been continually falling for us. And clearly, this is the work that we do within Norfolk Youth Justice. The last Norfolk figures were saying that we were getting about 122 per 100,000, which is lower than the Eastern region and significantly lower than the average for England and Wales of those between 10 and 17 entering the criminal justice system. If I give you a figure for the last calendar year, 316 young people referred to youth justice services. So, you know, and against that, 176 of those were given that what we call challenge for change, which is that you've done wrong, we know you've done wrong, i.e. the outcome 22, we know you've done wrong. You're not necessarily admitting it, because that's one of the conditions. You need to admit things for caution, so that this gives us a slight out. But if you do a series of, which is generally back into education or some learning or some skill development, that gives you an opportunity. So we've got a kind of a lever to get some of these people back into the mainstream, be it work, be it gathering, it's not quite work, but gathering skills that then they can translate and make them more marketable. So in that last year, 176 of those 316 were kind of pushed into that space, and just under 40 were given community resolutions, again, of that cohort, that age cohort, which basically meant you're apologising, make reparations, or you do something that says you're sorry, you feel the pain of doing that, and the victim sees that something has been done. So yes, we're working very, very hard, and continue to do to make the right judgment at the front end, and then put the individuals into the right channels relative to victim, wider society, and the individual themselves, and what they can gain from not ending up with some sort of court fine, which takes them nowhere other than potentially dropping back into an offending cycle.
And also it takes a long time to achieve it.
Well, that's an earlier point made.
Yeah.
You know, swift justice and the like.
Yeah.
Commissioner, if you take it back a step further as well, I think this is why it's particularly important to have officers in schools as well, as we do, because so much of their work is about intervening at earlier signs of trouble, even before you get to this stage, or certainly with a number of the offences that are caused on the school estate, ensuring that there's a proportionate response that doesn't unnecessarily criminalise as well.
I mean, on that point, I don't know whether you've had the opportunity, Commissioner, to go out with one of our school officers, because it's well worth.
I haven't been out with them. I've seen them in this forum, but I've not actually been on the ground.
Well, it might be worth. I mean, again, we're probably slightly out of sync relative to the agenda of this meeting, but probably post the meeting, probably worth the conversation. I say, only having done it recently myself, and spent a good morning going around and seeing the impact. It's a good point you mentioned. Seeing the impact, seeing how they add to the health of and the general good running of and the whole ethos of the school by having a police officer. And the individual I was talking about is an ex-detective with a real crime focus and really skilled in dealing with victims and witnesses and identifying intelligence. That's really helpful for the school and for us.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
And it does link to that antisocial behaviour action plan point as well.
Yeah.
When we established the Safer Schools officers, we looked at ASB incidents within a circumference area of where we had Safer Schools officers, and there's a positive impact, particularly in that period after school closure time or the route into school. So an important component of that. And dare I say, if down the line some further money was to come our way, there would be some sense in that being an area where we might look to channel something.
That makes sense, absolutely. Good. Anything else on that from my side? Anything from Joe? Chief or your team, anything else you want to add on that pillar? Grand. Item 9, pillar 5, supporting victims.
Right.
You're leading again, Sam.
I'm leaving again. Just give me a second while I scroll through my notes to get to the right page. One second. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, as the paper quite rightly identifies, one of the key issues here is the Victims Code of Practice and where we are with the Victims Code of Practice. Again, I've referenced a number of times our own forced performance framework. This is yet another one of those key issues where we look at each of the codes of practice or the requirements under the codes of practice, of which some of this is describing, and we go through that in quite granular detail. It's been a little bit of a challenge, and I don't mean a challenge in the sense that we're not doing it in substantial part of the Victims Code of Practice, but some of their systems don't always help us to interrogate and identify the information. But as it says there, we are now into that kind of VCOF dashboard, which is now live, and we're now using that to help us better see what's going on. Our officers, the Chief mentioned in one of his opening comments, one of the key drivers that the Chief has pushed into this organisation is quality investigations. Well, the quality investigation in the messaging that we're giving is around making sure we secure appropriately evidence and lines of inquiry and all the things you'd expect us to do professionally. To do that in a timely manner, i.e. to get on with it, grab the evidence. And the third key component is around caring for and being very victim focused, of which codes of practice is key, which is updating, making sure that the victim understands what we're doing, when we're doing it. So it's an absolute pillar of this, certainly I suspect pre the Chief's tenure, but certainly during the last 2 years, it's absolutely key and it's being reinforced at every opportunity. So under the Victims Code, very much work, a huge amount of work is reminding officers and making sure that they get what they think they're an individual as part of that crime. Point 2 there about delivering high quality investigations, I'm probably just repeating a little of what I'm saying around our focus on crime investigation. We've been doing some significant work that Ralph and his team in terms of making sure that we've got the right data and then the right implementation, looking at ensuring, and I think the Chief's already spoken to you about what's been going on in the West around our ability to crime investigate and making sure that we investigate crime in a way that has the right skills relative to the individuals. And that approach is being rolled out across the whole constabulary with a tier of slightly more complicated crime now being addressed by individuals in what we're calling district crime units. So that's rolling out as we speak. The operational investigation team, which is a kind of training team, or at least the individuals with the skills to train, have been very, very active, making sure that we ensure that investigators have got all the right skills and understand where the focus is, that we are using all aspects, whether it's criminal or civil, to ensure that we provide protection to and support and service to the victim. And then actually we are looking at giving the kind of broader satisfaction to the victim. And I think the last point I probably want to raise on this particular area, it's one of the bullet points is talking about what we call an art converter team. It was something the Chief and I were very keen on about 12 months ago, and now it's up and running, which is a team that allows us to go back to perpetrators of crime and talk to them pre and potentially post-sentence to say, well, what other crimes have you been involved in? Now, that gives, in my view, at least satisfaction. Sometimes that's just laid on file. sometimes taken into account by the judges or magistrates, but sometimes laid on file. But that at least gives victims of crime, we've been able to get back to a number of victims of crime now to say we know who did it, the individual is in prison, therefore if he or she has admitted the offence, we wouldn't have done that before, and that's giving us the opportunity to go back to victims of crime. I think I may pause at that point to seek questions. There's a few more bits and pieces on the paper, but I'll pause there for questions.
Just one on detail on converter. Does a crime declared under that context count as a solved crime?
Yes.
So it goes into the series. Good. First one I've got is about recruitment for the victims and witness care team, page 56, objective 5, bullet point 2. Recruitment is obviously an issue, and I wondered what we could do to address it. And I speak as much as the voice of the victim, recognising the importance of this team's role.
Well, we've had the conversation before a number of times, and we've talked about the additional workload that this team has to bear as a consequence of the delays. You know, they're kind of going around the same circle a number of times. So, although I'll respond to your question around numbers, just the context is that their workload is becoming quite repetitive, or we're duplicating workload. So we've an established a budgeted staff of just under 42 individuals in that particular space, of which we were at 33. We're now at just under 38 as it stands 2 or 3 days ago when I double checked. So we are closing the gap on vacancies. So the point being, when we spoke before, we had that gap of about 9 or 10. We're now down to about 4 or 5. Clearly, we've got a number of temporary posts that your office has supported in funding. There is a challenge always around temporary posts because we always want good quality individuals. And if you're putting out temporary posts, it might work for a period or a period while good quality people step from there into a permanent role. And again, because people enjoy working for us, that when we put our own permanent roles, a number of we rob Peter to pay Paul in their own system, but equally people use the skills that they get from us and head off elsewhere. It clearly is a focus for the HR recruitment team. You know, they're looking at opportunities to how are we going to make those sorts of roles particularly attractive. So we've been with the team itself, the recruiting team, are aware of some of those vacancies in our staff roles, but they know this is not least on a priority, but equally we are beholden to the market, and we've talked about inflation, but the other side of inflation is jobs and whatever. We've still got quite a buoyant job market, so we are challenged, or we do at least have to fight into that same market. But it is a priority. There is no doubt priority, and we're trying to make it as attractive as possible. Modern workplace is helpful in that, you know, new telephony systems, which means you can work in a way that becomes more flexible for individuals, so people can work from home in a way that makes it more attractive to some, or at least we can access different sorts of markets of individuals who want to probably work from home for a whole range of other reasons, working part-time and the like. And yeah, we're doing our very best to fill those roles. Another application's out. I think the application process closed on the 14th, and we did have, as of the 14th, 40 applicants for the post that was put out. So we're still looking, and we will kind of sift and work through. Yet working hard is a key priority. We see it as a key aspect of our offer.
40 or
40.
40. That's encouraging. Yeah. Assuming there are the
quality. Well, we will sift that down. Our experience tells us that it starts quite high, so the hopper's quite broad, and we narrow quite quickly.
What would like to add, Commissioner, if I may, is the main reason people are leaving these posts is because they are getting tired of ringing up victims to tell them that their court case has been delayed again.
That comes on to my next question about relationships, because it's a problem.
It is a problem,
yeah.
and they are literally on the receiving end of the feedback that the victim absolutely rightly and justifiably wants to give when they hear that news, particularly when it's been for the second, third or fourth time, and for some really, really difficult and harrowing cases. And of course, none of that is caused by policing. It's because the Crown Courts are still struggling to recover from the pandemic. Add on some industrial action into that mix as well, and there's a backlog that you are very familiar with. And of course, it's also the case that we've had to employ more people because of the size of that backlog. And again, that's been at the cost of policing for a problem that is not of our creation. And that is deeply frustrating. Difficult for our staff, means we're putting money into something which we could be putting into visibility, but most importantly, it's not good for victims.
I mean, as chair of the local criminal justice board, I'm aware that the view in the criminal justice system is that this is a longer term rather than a shorter term problem. I mean, the earliest that anyone is talking about addressing the current backlogs is 2027. We're now 2023. The pandemic ended when? A year ago, 18 months ago now.
And if I, sorry, to cut across you, but if I contrasted the accountability I feel for someone waiting maybe 10 minutes more for a 101 call, and compared that with the accountability that I don't see for people waiting months for a rape trial, I think it's out of kilter.
Yeah.
And this is very difficult stuff, and I take the opportunity just to say that the staff that are working in this unit are doing a sterling job, and they're incredibly trying circumstances and doing their best to maintain the trust and confidence of victims. So they really are working hard, and I'm very grateful for everything that they do.
I am, on my side of the house, about to respond to a letter from Michael Freer, who's a Minister for Courts and Justice in the Ministry of Justice, who wrote to me a month ago now about how he wanted to ramp up the role of the local criminal justice board. And they've rewritten the terms of reference. The real issue is that nothing's mandated, so we remain in the current arena where I can bring people together, but I can't direct them to address the issues. But one of the points I am going to raise is this transfer of costs into policing, and how policing ends up carrying the burden because others are stepping back, and we'll chat in that corner.
Let me just make an additional point to that. Of course, the point the Chief makes, that the actual obligation through our own staff is being borne by them. They're carrying this. You talked about that potential transfer of costs, but we talked at the opening of the meeting around that satisfaction, the measures of what we are faced as a criminal justice system.
Indeed.
And despite, I think the Chief's articulated it well as to why we end up where we are, but we're the ones, because we're the ones having the conversation, we're the ones that are having to say, and then that gets reflected back in terms of how people perceive the police, when all we happen to be are the front edge of that. And actually, you could argue, as I've described and as the police reinforced, we're doing sterling work in that space, but despite that, we are still getting lambasted or criticised or having our satisfaction and confidence eroded as a consequence.
And it's the whole system. It's the moment of charge by the CPS, the listing by HMCTS, the Germans by magistrates and judges, right the way through. And I can't remember which of you mentioned it, but I mean, the average of 18 months to get a rape or serious sexual assault case into court. And my list is a bit out of date, but I did have a list of 10 cases which were more than 3 years outstanding to get into court. I think hopefully we've addressed some of those by now. But
I mean, what I will say, bearing in mind that, as you quite rightly identify, you sit in that criminal justice board space. We do have constructive relationships. I wouldn't want you to take out from here that it's all, that it's all disaster. There are challenges in the system, and there are challenges in the system due to capacity versus demand. Fundamentally, if you were trying to balance the two, the scales of justice would be tipped. They wouldn't be particularly well balanced, and that's a fact. We know that, and as a consequence of that, we work very, very hard, and we have some very strong relationships, whether it's with the CPS or the court services, explaining, describing, having a clear view, trying to get at your point earlier, which is something I use as well myself. What is the single version of truth in this system? Not mine, not theirs, not the third parties. The courts, you talked about the courts. I know the courts are developing or have developed a recovery plan. Is it exactly the plan that we would like? Is it prompt and speedy? Probably not as prompt and speedy as we would hope, but I know they're working at it. There is plenty of communication. It's just that balance between my hopper to the very narrow aperture through which all this has to then start to pass through. And I think other chief constables are making the point that actually, do we have enough capacity in the court system? And that's not for me, that's for the judge, that's the presiding judge and judges, as well as the magistrate, to decide what and how they potentially respond.
Yeah, it's a perfectly fair challenge. I think there's two aspects to it. Does the current system work as efficiently? And there's one particular area, and I won't go into the details now, but there's one particular area where if we could just make that one function work more effectively, you'd pour a gallon of oil into the overall machinery. And then there is the overarching question you've just raised of the capacity against current demand. And of course, capacity is going to increase. 20,000 new officers, 224 new officers in Norfolk means more people being presented unless we divert them out, which of course compounds the delays.
Not least because, as Simon made clear earlier, in this force, we want more arrests, we want more proactivity, we want more people brought to justice, and that's what we're pushing our teams to do. And that's what we are doing, it's what we are delivering. And it's not the case, nor will it be the case that I've let the any backlogs in the system stop us from doing that. But it's only going to put more pressure on a system that's clearly under strain. And Simon is right to underline, we have good relationships with all of these partners, we really do. But there's a real problem there, and there's a problem there for victims.
Yes, I was going to ask a question on relationships, but I think we've really addressed that, so I'll park that. Anything else? Anything from my side on Pillar 5? Jill, anything further on your side, Chief?
So thank you.
Grand. On to Pillar 6, Stronger and Safer Communities.
I'm going to ask Ralph to cover this one.
Charles? Happy? Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Yes, despite the heat, there are a few key points to raise. Safe and strong communities, road safety. We have got a slight increase in killed or serious injured collisions compared to the previous 12 months and the long-term average. And obviously, road safety is a high priority owing to the level of harm. As you can imagine with something like this, every event is carefully analysed. We're not seeing any discernible pattern other than sort of driver error in terms of preventative activities on these to date, but further analysis ongoing. The report goes on to highlight there's been no let up in the kind of activity, both preventative and enforcement. So there's been the road safety campaigns around speed, insurance, drink and drug campaign, and resultant arrests and offences have been highlighted. So over 4,000 in the speed campaign within 2 weeks, 156 arrests in the drink and drug drive campaign in December. What might have been highlighted as sort of innovative multi-agency days is now customary, so there have been the multi-agency days of action, as one would expect. And alongside that enforcement strand, we've also got the education. So there's a continuing focus on the fatal four. That's mobile phone use, seatbelt, speeding, and drinking drugs are seen as one. And there continues to be that sort of focus on the younger drivers, statistically led or evidence-based led. I've also included, just highlighted here, in terms of e-scooter presentations, and that's gone on to nearly 2,000 students. And then having just come from the Community Speedwatch conference this morning, we are also, it's highlighted in here, the paper, that we're looking forward to the new system that will unlock the power of the data that's continually being captured on the roads across the county. And once we get access to that data, I think it will inform us better for focusing both from constabulary side on the enforcement, but also perhaps engineering and the educational efforts going forwards. So that's the road safety element of the paper. In terms of sort of crime, antisocial behaviour and harm working with partners, I think we've kind of covered areas around antisocial behaviour, but it is greatly facilitated working in partnership with our long-standing operational partnership teams, one per district, and that's working with partners, housing associations, district councils and so forth on those antisocial behaviour elements and vulnerability. In terms of neighbourhood crime, we remain a low burglary crime county. And whilst vehicle crime has been increasing a little bit in the last 12 months, this is still lower than pre-pandemic levels. Arson, criminal damage and robbery offences are still below the long-term average. And pleasingly, the increase in the solved offences proportionately greater than the increase in prevalence, i.e. robbery offences are now being solved at a higher rate than the long-term average. So that's good news. And equally, in terms of those positive outcomes or solved, there's been a significant increase in the percentage of hate crimes that have been solved compared to the long-term average, which we are assigning to a review and a focus on our investigative principles and some work that we've really put into this area. So we see that as very important, of course, as hate crime can correlate to community tensions. Moving into the area of mental health, again, I think we've sort of covered throughout the meeting, particularly right care, right person. There are other elements, so we do monitor carefully how many mental health assessments are going on in custody. They have continued to increase, but we are working with partners to ensure that beds are located and individuals move from custody to hospital as quickly as possible with exactly that right care, right person principle in hand. And we see a reduction in the Section 136 detentions and executed Section 135 warrants within the community, which again we're assigning to the introduction of the wellbeing hubs and the jointly operated car. So some positive steps there, but really a small part of a bigger venture that will be discussed as agreed at the last actions later in the year. And then finally, in terms of prevention, the focus we've had a focus on catalytic converter thefts. The kind of customary awareness raising, press releases, social media, but also some detailed analysis to understand makes, models, and work with suppliers around preventative activity and target hardening. Fraud has already come up in terms of the strategic policing requirements, and we do still have our bodyguards up and running, which is supporting fraud victims and its volunteers assisting us with this across the county. But equally, that is an area that the force is considering how we can invest to have a greater capability in that area. Again, a challenge alongside Pillar 2. Street Safe, as part of our violence against women and girls strategy response, we've got targeted patrols, and it's by the Precept funded community policing team that's been drawn out in this paper. Very present in Norwich, Great Yarmouth and Kings Lynn, particularly pushing the fact of the Street Safe public reporting tool. But it is a small team of officers that are able to have an impactful arrival into public space, and it has the dual effect of positive reassurance for the majority, and of course, actually, it can be proactive policing on the other hand for those not or with nefarious activities. So children and young people team, again, we've kind of covered it, in fact, emphasised the safer schools element of it. They not only from the safeguarding and the restorative justice style approaches, they continue massively with the engagement campaign. So be it hate crime, be it multi-agency work with the Crucial Crew and anti-bullying, we engage with thousands of students, and the numbers are in the paper. And finally, in terms of encouraging volunteers, you opened mentioning sort of a small force alongside the 5th largest county. We have a thriving cadet scheme, and I would like to make a special mention to our cadet manager in terms of the progress with the Safe to Operate standards. A cadet scheme, if you're going to do it, you have to really do it properly, and he's got us to second in the nation, I think, in terms of how many of those multiple thresholds you have to meet that we have met across against the other constabularies. Special constabulary, we are broadly static in terms of numbers, but the hours given have seen a slight rise, which we're extremely grateful for as always, particularly in doing big events like Winter Court over the Christmas period. Likewise, police support volunteers, we've seen the numbers go up. And that is a wide range of roles, be it neighbourhood watch, CCTV viewing, through to force heritage elements. But again, we're extremely grateful for the contributions. And finally, kind of links again to this morning's conference around Community Speed Watch. We're up to 910 members, which is an increase. And we've seen over 17,000 letters sent out from their work. And we'll have an action week in November. We had one in November, which we've just discussed repeating and trying to introduce further police officer support. But again, so extremely grateful to all the volunteers who give all those hours, but it's very important that we add and gain their support to our mission. And they're the highlights.
Brilliant, thank you. My first question was going to be about causes of care size, but I think you basically said that if we knew the answer, we'd be able to wave the magic wand and address them. So I'll move swiftly on from that. I noted the increase in vehicle crime, 1,800 versus 1,606 over the previous 12 months. Am I right in thinking that's catalytic converter thefts and also car meets? Is that car meets a factor?
Well, both really, I think, Commissioner.
I don't.
Well, just on catalytic converter thefts, yes, we've seen a spike across the region, not just Norfolk. We've had some disruption activity recently that I think is quite promising in terms of our efforts to stop this spike from occurring. Our moonshot teams, so our ANPR teams, for people listening in, and our road policing teams in particular have been very active in here. Of significance, we arrested 3 males in Cambridgeshire on the 26th of March. All 3 of them have been charged, one's been remanded, and we hope that will have an impact. This is criminality that's travelled to the county.
Yeah.
And the use of ANPR technology and our specialist assets, we hope, is going to put an end to that. Car meets, yes, and we call this crime, call this antisocial behaviour. It is an issue. There are a number of gathering points across the county for car enthusiasts. I think most prominently Broadland, South Norfolk, Breckland, the central part of the county. But most of these people have a passion about their cars and want to show that off in a peaceful way. Some of that group show it off in a way that I would classify as antisocial behaviour. We need to be careful that we don't assume that everyone who has a passion about their car is causing nuisance. But nonetheless, with partners, local problem-solving plans are in place. A combination of warning notices, but also the encouragement of good behaviour as well. Installation of ANPR and enforcement cameras where it's necessary. Our road policing team and again the moonshot teams are well aware of this issue. You might be aware that in Norwich a public space protection order is in place in one particular hotspot area, so we monitor that and whether it would be a tactic that would be worth repeating elsewhere. So not just the police, but considerable partner activity whilst looking at this and trying to look what problems there are in the bud.
May I just add a further point? The paper talks about the last 12 months, but when you look at our baseline being 2019, the long-term average, we're seeing some quite significant reductions in theft from a vehicle and theft of vehicles as well. So, a lot of activity going into using technology, using the teams that Ralph referred to, the moonshot teams, ensuring that certain stolen vehicles, once we know they're a stolen vehicle, it's very hard to move stolen vehicles on our roads. We're very quick to respond. Good.
Let me move swiftly on then. We've got the 4 questions from the public, which I put under pillar 6. The first one follows on recent media reporting about the arrest of a pedestrian in Exchange Street and highlights the issue of enforcement of the City Council's traffic restrictions on Exchange Street. I wonder if you could comment on that issue and police enforcement.
Of course. So since the introduction of that pedestrian zone, some enforcement has been carried out. However, there was clearly a high level of non-compliance with the zone. And it was the constabulary's position that education signage, proper signage in advance were important factors in helping to solve that. We raised those concerns with appropriate partners. An additional signage has now been put in place, so we wait to monitor the impact of that. The local policing team are very aware of the issues. We will look to intervene when we witness offences. That could be education, words of advice, that could be enforcement. We have to recognise that some of the transport down that route is for delivery and is for taxi carriages as well, so some vehicles will legitimately be going through there. But we have discretion as to how we apply traffic legislation, and we aim to be proportionate, particularly where confusion is sometimes the cause of the problem. There is a reality, and we keep coming back to visibility today. we can't permanently be positioned at the bottom of Exchange Street to police this. And we encourage further discussion on whether the installation of enforcement cameras similar to that elsewhere in the city, in St Stephen's Street, for example, would be a long-term solution. But that would be a matter for other authorities, and they couldn't be installed until a traffic order is made permanent, and that certainly wouldn't be until later in the year.
But that sounds like the most sensible approach.
I would suggest so.
Yeah. Which leads us on to the second one, which probably follows on from remarks I made in a county council meeting. And I'm now sufficiently educated, I could actually answer this, but I'm going to ask the constabulary to answer this. 20-mile-an-hour limits are popular with residents and road users alike, many of whom were upset to hear that these limits are seldom enforced in Norfolk. May I ask you to set out the legal position and government advice about police enforcement of 20 mph restrictions?
Well, yes, I will, and you can mark this by all means, Commissioner. But I will forgive me, given the nature of it, if I read out so that there can be no confusion about this, and I'll try and make this as brief as possible, but it's not always too easy. So, in 1999, Road Traffic Regulation Act was amended to allow local authorities to introduce 20-mile-an-hour restrictions without the prior approval of the Secretary of State. There are two forms of a 20-mile-an-hour area. Firstly, a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, which is established with the legal authority of a traffic order, and a 20-mile-an-hour zone, which does not have the legal authority of a traffic order, and is designed to be self-enforcing through signs or other traffic calming measures, street furniture, speed humps, chicanes, etc. The Department for Transport state that to achieve compliance, there should be no expectation on the police to provide additional enforcement beyond their routine activity. Furthermore, in the absence of a traffic order, the minimum speed limit remains 30 miles an hour in law, despite 20-mile-an-hour signs. Hence, in those circumstances, the courts would not support a prosecution. The constabulary takes what I believe is a responsible and proportionate approach to enforcement of 20-mile-an-hour limits based on our assessment of risk. And when it comes to speed enforcement across the county, regardless of the zones, risk is clearly going to be one of the main things that we consider, and risk most notably where we see killed and seriously injured traffic collisions. As you know, road safety, casualty reduction is important to us, and for the reasons I've just outlined, we'll focus our finite resource in the areas that do cause us most risks. So therefore, it follows that police enforcement of 20-mile-an-hour limits and zones is not something that might routinely be done, but could be appropriate, depending on the circumstances applied to that risk. Where we're fortunate as a county, we've mentioned it earlier today, we have our community speed watch volunteers who assist us in making the roads safe, and that would apply to these areas if appropriate. I think that there's probably limited understanding or clarity as the difference between zones and limits, and that is often the cause of some of the frustrations from the public. And if it takes me a couple of minutes to explain it, then that probably demonstrates why it can be so difficult.
And I think there is an assumption that if you put up a red circle with a 20 in it, that the police will be there and will enforce it. And of course, a single stretch gets championed by a particular community, forgetting that we could spread 20-mile-an-hour signs like confetti across the county, and we wouldn't have the resource. Even if the government's direction was self-enforcing, we wouldn't have the resource to enforce.
Clearly, as the Chief has quite rightly said, we use the data, we use the information that we have to focus the limited capacity that we've got, certainly through our roads and our policing teams, to focus on those areas where we're getting those killed and seriously injured. Our focus has to be on those individuals that if we don't intervene, potentially will end up in a big incident, a big crash. Of course, and the point I think made by the chief earlier, speeding is antisocial, actually, in lots of parts of our residential communities, and that's why with your funding with these cameras, the road safety partnership work, the focus on local speed enforcement vans, and also using our neighbourhoods as well to be part of that response. Because as we know, although it probably sounds slightly anecdotal, but experience will tell me when we have complaints in residential areas, and we go out, predominantly the residents, they end up with speed tickets because they're the ones that are using the roads.
Yeah.
But we do it, and we do focus when those areas are highlighted. But our predominant focus is dealing with those people to prevent people dying or being seriously injured.
I'll go on to the third one. This relates to motor vehicles being parked on pavements, and the question comes from someone who says it's parked on pavements is a nuisance and a danger to legitimate pavement users. This could be addressed through the use of Section 137 Highways Act of 1980 or Section 22 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, respectively. But when I, i.e. the questioner, recently sought to report such an incident, I was told the police neither have the powers nor responsibilities around parking until I reminded the officer of the law. Will Norfolk Police commit to enforcing these laws?
Thank you, Commissioner. That probably takes a little bit of unpacking. So if I just deal with the parking element first.
Yes.
So the law was changed locally in 2011 to place responsibility on Norfolk County Council for general parking matters, so they are no longer in the hands of the police service. However, there is legislation under Section 137 of the Highways Act 1980, which states that if a person without lawful authority excuse in any way willfully obstructs free passage along a highway, that they are guilty of an offence. So from a practical position, officers indeed can enforce obstructions on the highway. That would be for an individual officer to assess on a case-by-case basis and ensure that our response is proportionate, depending upon what we are faced with. I think in some parts of the county, we have this challenge of more cars than we have parking spaces, narrow roads, medieval city, and sometimes pavements do get blocked. And that can often cause frustration to local residents, and I understand that frustration. Of course, members of the public can report cases of dangerous parking to both council or indeed us, and then we would respond on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. And the final one, Operation SNAP. And the question says, this is an effective way of engaging the public in reporting and enforcing road traffic offences. Officer time per enforced offence is much reduced, and officers are freed from attending courts as witnesses. Third party reporting is similarly used by a number of forces, including South Yorkshire and West Midlands, to enforce parking offences, such as we've just discussed. But he then makes the point, the Road Safety Trust is currently offering grants of up to £50,000 to trial this sort of scheme. Will you consider running a pilot scheme in Norfolk?
Ralph, do you want me to go, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So the constabulary recognises the advantages of Operation SNAP and continues to support the public around the opportunity of submitting footage and securing prosecutions against those offending drivers. I suppose the aspect, though, as kind of consistent throughout the day, has been with finite resources, balancing the energy and focus of our officers on the offences that present the greatest risks to road users. So any move that provides a process that offers submissions associated with parking offences, from our perspective, would require additional resourcing, and therefore, with that in mind, thorough consideration, because where does that resourcing come from? So at the moment, we see that offences such as being parked in a dangerous position can indeed, as the Chief has just said, be dealt with through the existing service as appropriate and is assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. That's all the questions from the public, and indeed all the questions on Pillar 6. Anything else from my team? Chief, anything from further on your side that you want to bring out?
No, thank you very much.
Grand. Which brings us on to item 11, any emerging operational risks that haven't already been covered or that you particularly want to highlight?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground this afternoon. It's covered.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else to add. Simon?
No, I think.
I just had one question of curiosity. Is there any significant operational call on the constabulary for the coronation, either here at Sandringham or down in London?
Nothing that we're not prepared for.
Yeah.
We continue to be notified of local community events that are taking place across the county, but I would imagine that they will just be events of celebration and should not cause significant demand for us. If I was honest, Commissioner, I would imagine the fact that there's an extra evening's worth of nighttime economy would probably create more demand than the coronation itself would.
No, fair enough. Anything else under operational risks? No hands going up. Item 12, any other business? Anything else anyone wants to raise? Seems to be sprinting to the finishing tape, which is encouraging. In which case, date of the next meeting, 5th of July, commencing at 10 o'clock, and we'll go here again in the Barnsley room. And as before, we will assume that the public won't attend, although they're very welcome to if they do, but we will put the recording out into the public domain. So it will be another public meeting as usual. And on that note,
Thank you.
just with thanks for those that wrote all the reports and for all the information that we've had this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we'll close the meeting.